got sound, Brian?
We got sound.
Okay,
Yes, actually, we've got good sound too. That's pretty good.
Today we get to talk with Brian Salt from the Salthaven Wildlife Rehabilitation and Education Centre in southwestern Ontario. Brian started Salthaven in the 1990s, and it has grown to the point where his team takes care of 2,000 wild animals in need of help. Brian, welcome to Two Old Guys Talking.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Brian, the first thing that sort of occurred to me when I was looking at what you do is the volume of animals that you take care of. You must have a lot of people helping you out.
Well, actually, we do. Salthaven has become a community effort. It's not just about Brian Salt. We typically have about 120 clinical volunteers that work 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week. With COVID, however, we've had to cut way back. We currently have about 35 volunteers, but one of the problems is that we still have the same number of phone calls, about 100 phone calls a day that come in for sick, injured, and orphaned wildlife. The scope of what's happening to Canadian wildlife is almost overwhelming. And but the number of volunteers that we have currently, the numbers are down so that we can accommodate COVID protocols, and we're having to turn away a lot of animals because of that. But generally speaking, it's 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week, and we see everything from chipmunks to fawns and hummingbirds to bald eagles and just about everything in between.
Brian, I just wanted to ask you about this here, because you just touched on this a second ago, and I had a thought about it from that perspective. You mentioned like it's increasing, and is it because of pressure on the environment?
Yeah, we're using a lot more pesticides, fertilizers, and whatnot. Southwestern Ontario is being overrun with ginseng, and it's the new tobacco crop, you know. And they pour the soil with everything from industrial Roundup to God only knows what. And it's intoxicating to the animals, everything from insectivores. Our barn swallow populations have dropped significantly in the last 5 years. They're killing insects with the sprays, but the birds are still eating those insects before they die, and they're getting those toxins as well. We had 6 mallard ducks that wandered into a ginseng field, and at our old location, which was one of the impetuses for us to make a move. And they were only in there for about 10 minutes, and all 6 of them died of the same neurological symptoms. So it makes you wonder what is leaching into our well water, and what's happening in the environment that is so important. And when you call the Ministry of the Environment to find out just what exactly is going on there, they're very reticent to help because it's a cash crop. They get special subsidization from the government, and so there's a lot of toxins in the environment. So yes, but it's not only industrial stuff. It's things that we do in our very own backyards. Rat poisons, for instance. We see a number of eagles, hawks, and so on, and owls especially, that end up dying from secondary rodenticide poisoning. So typically what happens, people put rat poison out for mice or rats, and the hawks get these rodents because the rodents are now not very quick and easy prey. But those birds, the very animals that are helping us keep rodent populations under control, are being poisoned inadvertently by us as humans. And it's a terrible way for them to die because they bleed internally. If we can get them soon enough, we can help them. But all too often, the poison has become systemic, and as a result, they die a horrible death.
Well, for everyone that you save, how many don't get saved? I've got a follow-up question to that, but I was wondering that first.
Yes, that's a good question. We have about a 65% success rate ongoing over the years, and that's an average over the last 10 years. So, you know, you dumb the math down, and you have 1,000 animals. You've got 350 of them that aren't going to make it. And
well, those are the ones you see, Brian, but I meant
Oh,
like I know you can't. How do we put a number on that? But if you had to take a guesstimate, how many do you not hear about it
yeah, that's
that
really
are victimized?
really hard to know for sure. We probably see a small percentage of what's happening in the environment. It's really difficult to know for sure. I would suspect it's different in different areas of the province here in Ontario, depending on agricultural the process, and what is allowed and what isn't. All we have to do is look at water in the in the reserves. That
Yep.
here in Ontario again, there was just a special water advisory, and it's ongoing. It seems to be systemic. It's a problem, and but unfortunately, the politicians aren't giving it the attention that it needs.
Well, this is my follow-up question then. It's a bit of a devil's advocacy, but there's only so many Brian Salts out there and so many volunteers out there, and there's only so much of you left over at the end of the day. So you've got cause and effect with this sort of thing. And so the time, again, people have to give where their heart wants to give, and I understand that. But is it not better to be investing the resources in putting the pressure where would we do more good for the animals that you end up ultimately seeing by abandoning them, if you know what I mean, and focusing all of our resources on putting the pressure on those decision makers that might have a more of an umbrella effect?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. It's a hard one to answer. We don't know how effective that would be. We're really working at the root of the problem, and that seems to be making people aware of the plight of Canadian wildlife, first of all, because without that knowledge, there's really no impetus to do anything about it, right?
Hmm.
And it's right in our title, Salthaven Wildlife Rehabilitation and Education
And
Center. And that education comes from both the inside with our volunteers that become aware of what's going on out there in the environment and how to curtail it, as well as before COVID, of course, we were making about 100 presentations a year in schools, universities, even old age homes and things of that nature. So the education side is really important, and how that education is presented is really important as well. If you take a bombastic attitude on it, it's probably going to come back and hit you. And we also depend on grants that are really important to Salthaven, and some of these grants come from government sources. So we got to be really delicate
Bit
with
of,
how we present this stuff.
bit of a balancing act there.
It really is. So it's a difficult situation. Sometimes we feel like we're banging our head against the wall, and it's not making a difference. But then I get phone calls from parents that say, you had a profound effect on our daughter today, and she's 8 years old. She was in a school presentation that you gave over Zoom, and we were going to throw away some yogurt containers, and she told us, no, you can't do that. You got to wash it out first, then cut it. So if a raccoon or a skunk that has a narrow face gets their heads in there, it's not going to get stuck. So we think that we are making a difference, and the kids really are going home and indoctrinating the parents.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're not going to change everybody all at once, but what we hope to do is that you draw the line, and then you move that line even so little bit to those individuals that really do care, but just need to be made aware of what they can do in their very own backyard. Keeping your cat indoors and not incarcerating them, but helping them to be happy indoors. It's a little
Yeah.
bit of training, but any animal or pet should be trained so that they can be happy and that they're not going to be in harm's way. You put your cat outdoors at night, and they're going to be subject to that secondary rodenticide poisoning too. But they're also going to be prey to vehicular traffic, coyotes, great horned owls. We're seeing more and more great horned owls in the city than we've ever seen before. And I think it goes hand in hand with the bloom of feral cats. So one of the favorite foods of great horned owls, of course, is skunks. So if you got a black and white kitty, I wouldn't advise you putting it out at night.
That's,
Right.
that's very interesting because, I joke around that I have joint custody of a cat. And I sometimes feel guilty that he sort of spends half his time with me and half of his time with a friend of mine who lives in the same building. And I sometimes feel guilty. Well, shouldn't I really let him outside? But then I know, particularly where I live in a very forested area, that the owls or the coyotes or one of the feral cats is going to get him. So
Mm.
I try and play hide and seek with him. He's actually a pretty smart guy. But yet, trying to
Is,
give
is,
him some quality of life, the idea of keeping this cat in a 600 square foot place for 15 years doesn't seem quite right to me. So
I empathize with your feelings, and yet we keep birds in cages that are much smaller than that, and they're not allowed to fly. We have 3 videos on our YouTube channel that help people to understand how that they can make their cat happy indoors. You can't incarcerate them. I mean, that would be cruel.
yeah,
But the onus is really on us as humans to help them to be comfortable. Maybe moving the armchair to the picture window with the bird feeder right outside the window. That's cat TV as far as the cat's concerned,
yeah.
and they'll sit there for hours being enhanced by what's coming to the feeders.
Well, I've always tried to think of ways that I can give the cat stimulation. We can let him out in the hallway for a little bit, and he does have the 2 suites that he can walk around in. We have kitty condos for him, and
Mm.
as I say, I try and play hide and seek with the guy, and he's smart. He gets right into that. He will come up. I'll be crouched down on the bed by the side of the bed, trying to peek around the corner to get him, and I'll look up, and he's up on top of the bed looking down at me.
is the impact of wildlife on cats, if they're outside, greater than or lesser than the impact of cats on wildlife outside?
Yeah, that's really hard to say.
There's just a lot of literature saying that they do a lot of damage. They kill and kill and kill.
Well, it's estimated in the United States last year alone that cats allowed to run loose were responsible for over 2 billion songbird deaths. That's just in the United States. It's a wonder we have any songbirds left at all at that rate.
Yes.
And this is ongoing. There are other things, of course, too, window strikes and things like that. And that's another thing we can do things about. There's all of Salthaven's windows are fitted with these little dots from a company called Feather Friendly. When we first moved into our new location 2 years ago, we had on average at least 1 bird strike every day. We have a lot of windows here. And so it was a concern for us because, we're supposed to be saving birds, and here we were bumping them off with our windows. So we researched it, and we found a company that provides you with these strips that you put on every 2 inches, but they're strips. It goes on fairly quickly, and it's relatively a cheap operation as well. And we reduced our window strikes from at least 1 a day to only 1 in the last year.
Amazing.
So it's effective. It does work, and it takes a little bit of effort, but if it's something that you're really concerned about, and we all should be. The number of bird strikes, oftentimes we point the finger at these uh, industrial monoliths out there that are all mirrored windows. And certainly they are a hazard for migratory birds. There's no doubt about that. But by far and away, more bird strikes happen in houses than they do on these large buildings, mirrored buildings. And the reason for that is there's a lot more houses out there than there are square footage of these large buildings. So that's something that we can be doing in our very own backyard. We can bird proof our windows, and that would help immensely. This time of the year, we get calls every day for birds that have hit windows. And some of them make it, but many of them don't. Concussion, head trauma, fractured wings and legs. These are all things that they suffer as a result of window strikes.
Brian, when you get a phone call about not just bird strikes, but any animal being injured, do you have staff that go out and pick the animal up?
Yeah, there are occasions where we can do that. But when you figure 100 calls a day,
Yeah.
it's virtually impossible for us to get out to everybody. So we ask the public to partner with us, and if it's at all possible for them to bring it into us, that helps a great deal. There are some animals, of course, like coyotes or eagles or large owls. We wouldn't ask the public to try to rescue those. They might get hurt. So we'll send a crew out. But
That's actually the
yeah,
last time, Brian, you and I had a face to face. It was, I don't remember all the details, it was quite a while ago, but for some reason, because of the work I do with dogs, I had been listed in the yellow pages like as an animal control. And I got a call from a lady who had said, it was a very thick accent and I couldn't really understand her, but it was something about beagles fighting. And normally I wouldn't go out for something like that either, but I can't remember why, but I did go out and I got to her house and she pointed to this crate and I said, well, where is it? And she said, the beagle's in there. And I looked in it, I think it was a peregrine falcon. So she thought it was an eagle. And I think it was like a sky battle there, whether it was territory or breeding or whatever. But that one plummeted. So that's where the last time you and I met face to face was you went out
yeah.
on that one because that's like are peregrines still an endangered species?
Yeah, they're a species of special concern, and depending on the area, but they are making a comeback.
Yeah.
They are back in the late 60s and early 70s, if you recall, we were using a lot of DDT in the environment for insect control. That had a devastating effect on peregrine falcons and bald eagles. The nests were failing. The shells were too thin, and of course the eggs would break when they were being incubated, and the number of peregrine falcons and bald eagles in southwestern Ontario plummeted. And of course, in Ontario, because it's an agricultural area in southwestern Ontario, and that's where all the damage was done. But they have made a remarkable comeback, especially bald eagles in southwestern Ontario. We're seeing them more and more all the time now. And then you got the situation here with wind turbines, and we're seeing birds that are being messed up with these blades. Bats, surprisingly enough, their radar, you think, well, shoot, they'd avoid those blades like no tomorrow, but they're not being hit by the blades. What's happening is the blades cause such a low pressure system behind the blade. They fly from a relatively ambient pressure to a very low pressure. And what happens, it explodes their lungs. So they come in without a mark on them, but they're bleeding from the mouth and they're having respiratory problems and ultimately end up dying. So yeah, these are things in the environment that we need to think through carefully. We need electricity. We need certain things in the environment that help us. We need houses, but subdivisions choke out wildlife out of their natural environment. Roads divide the natural habitat. So things like snakes, for instance, suffer because of that. We have black rat snakes that used to be quite prolific in southwestern Ontario. Now you can only find them in two small places. One at the north shore of Lake Erie in a very small area, and another one near a little town called Prescott, just east of Brockville. Those are the only two areas. And these are the longest snakes in all of Canada. They grow up to 8 feet long, and they're constrictors. They're non-venomous, an excellent ally in rodent control. But again, their habitat fragmentation. Also, they suffer from secondary rodenticide. So, all these things are uh, caused by humans. They hurt the same way we hurt, but all too often, we're the cause for that hurt. And so we need to take some responsibility for it.
Brian, if you were king of the world and you didn't have to worry about blowback from government or whatever, you just could make a decision, what would be the top three things that you would do with wildlife protection and education in mind?
Well, I think first of all, I would implement that education process in the schools. We learn a lot about geography and we learn a lot about history, but what's happening right now?
That's a good
And
idea.
what can we do in the schools to make this more of uh, something that the kids can sink their teeth into? There are teachers now that are doing that on their own. Lucas High School has an excellent program there, environmental program. And Dwayne Campbell, who is one of the teachers there, goes out of his way to help students understand the plight of Canadian wildlife and wildlife around the world and our part in it as humans.
It's an actual course being offered at the school?
Yes. And Dwayne has done an amazing job on that. I think the second thing that I would do is I would have some government support for the work that goes on in these rehabilitation centers. That is important in the sense that, this is I mean, I'm the boss and I don't get paid. I don't know how that works, but anyway, it's it just isn't a very lucrative thing for anybody to get into, and unless you're very passionate about it in a very special way, you're likely not going to get involved. Veterinarian
There's
students don't, for the most part. There are some veterinarians that are very handy with wildlife and have taken it upon themselves to study exotics and Canadian wildlife. And but again, the pay is not good.
No, but Brian, with regards to that, it's been a lot of years since I regularly cross paths with various rehabilitation centers, probably 20 years. At that time, it was as it is now, I think an unregulated industry, if you will. And there were an enormous amount of people doing rehab because they loved animals but knew nothing about them and perhaps did as much harm as they did good. So, like, again, if you did get government support for that sort of thing, how would that work so that we had more Brian Salts and less or virtue signaling type people out there where we actually did some good.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We at Salthaven, we've been advocates of continuing education credits for
Mm.
quite a while now, and we've petitioned the government on this. It doesn't matter what business you're in. You could be a life insurance salesman or a lawyer. You have to have continuing education credits to stay current.
Yeah.
And I mean, things change. Drugs that were effective 5 years ago are no longer effective. Unless you're getting educated on that, you're going to be not effective in wildlife rehab. There's a lot of backyard rehabilitators, and that's not a bad thing because that's how everybody seems to get into it. But you need to be trained properly. And I would advocate that you should be writing an exam. You need to be continuing after your license to prove yourself worthy to work in this business, if you can call it a business. I mean, you're dealing with zoonotics and diet protocols that change over time because of our environmental situation. Things are changing. Diet protocols, drug protocols, zoonotics, parasitology. These are all fluid type of science that needs to be kept on top of. But there's very little by the way of education for these individuals. Even veterinarians at the university level are not. They don't learn a whole lot about wildlife. They learn some, but they don't learn an awful lot. Even the Ministry of Natural Resources, they understand populations wonderfully well, but the individual plight of the animal is not well understood by them at all. So there's this dichotomy, and some of these wildlife rehabilitators that are not educated well become a pain in the backside for the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources. So you develop an us against them type of attitude that doesn't work very well. I've always maintained that the power of 1 + 1 is not 2, it's 11. That synergy that's developed when two people are working together is way more powerful than a single individual. Even in the music industry, Lennon and McCartney, Simon and Garfunkel, though when it's paired together, the effects are magic. And I think that the same thing could be happening in the wildlife rehabilitation sector. But unfortunately, yet it's not. It's a dream of mine, and hopefully one day it'll happen.
What's your number three?
Well, again, that would be it. Having people licensed to be wildlife rehabilitation individuals. with credentials. There are credentials out there now that would make you suitable to being able to work as a zookeeper. These are done through the International Association of Avian Trainers and Educators, the NWRA, the IWRC. There are designations out there, but they're primarily American built, which doesn't make it any less effective. But we don't have much of that in Canada, mainly because of the way our government system is set up. You develop a relationship with somebody from the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources or Canadian Wildlife Service for that matter, and 4 years later, you're starting all over again because it's all new people. And so it makes it really difficult.
It would
But
take them a while to ramp up and become familiar with the status quo and the situation.
sure it would. But it's the same old story. You drop a drumstick on stage, you don't stop playing, you pick up another one and continue on. And that's what you got to do here as well.
Now, you have a branch or a subsidiary in Saskatchewan, don't you?
Mhm.
Do you
Yeah,
encounter the same sort of issues out there as you do here?
yeah, but not on the same scale. I think it's the Ministry of the Environment out there is what it's called, and they're hungry for people like Salthaven West to help. It's a major flyway for a lot of migratory birds,
Right.
much more so than we are here in Ontario, actually. Um, and there's only two wildlife rehabilitation centers in all of Saskatchewan.
Hmm.
So when we suggested to them that we'd like to open an operation in Saskatchewan, they rolled out the red carpet. They were excited. They wanted us to be there. Megan, who we sent out there to take care of Salthaven West, has just done a stellar job. She's skilled. She spent 10 years at Salthaven, learning the process and how to help the animals. But the first animals that they brought her were two young porcupines, and she had. Well, of course, we don't get porcupines here in southwestern Ontario. So the first phone call she made back to me is, "What do we do with these?" So
But
we had to do a little bit of research, and we came up with a logo for her out there as a result of that, and put it on a T-shirt and said Salthaven West, ready, quilling, and able.
with regards to like an issue like that, she gets an animal that you have almost no experience with. Are there veterinarians that deal with that sort of specialty, or what would you do in a case like that?
Yeah, not very many veterinarians are skilled with wildlife on any level,
Yeah. Okay.
but there are people in different parts of the country who are very skilled,
Oh, okay.
and they have the credentials. And so we just kind of muscle up with them, and say, hey, what do you do? Here's the situation. How would you handle this, and why? And so it's an education again, but you're dealing with people who are knowledgeable and willing to help and have the time to help you. And it usually works out. And from that experience, little by little, you gain experience with animals that you haven't had the chance to work with in the past. But there's all kinds of different things.
Sure.
There's diseases, there's injuries. What kind of drugs? I mean, you can give a dog morphine, but you kill a raccoon with it, type of thing. So these are
Well,
things that you learn as you go.
well, there are things even about dogs that I didn't know. I didn't know you couldn't feed a dog chocolate, for God's sake.
Mhm.
So if an animal at the rehabilitation center is in need of surgery, does the veterinary or the expert come out to you?
In the past, we have taken these animals to veterinarians to work with in an environment that they're comfortable with because they have all the tools. Your mechanic doesn't come to you to fix your car. You take your car to the mechanic because he
Right,
has all the tools he needs there, right?
right, right,
And
right.
generally speaking, that's the way it is. Salthaven is working towards having an operating theater in their clinic. We moved from a one-room clinic to a nine-room clinic, and we're in the process of building our own lab now. Sometimes an animal will come in sick. You're not sure what it is. You send a blood sample off. If it's a Friday, you might be lucky if you get it back by Tuesday. By that time, the animal's either died or recovered. And so we're hoping to get right to the root of the problem. We have an IDEX blood machine. We have lead testing equipment. We have We have microscopes that will help us to identify problems on a microscopic level. And that's going to be a big boost to what we do here at Salthaven. The operating theater will be something that veterinarians will be comfortable with because it'll have all the tools that they need to be right there. And it'll be a learning experience for our interns as well. We get interns from all over the world. We've had them from Denmark, France, Germany, Puerto Rico, throughout Canada and the United States. And some of them come to Salthaven not only learn about the animals, but to learn about English. It seems to be the international business language, so it's important for them to learn that. We had two Puerto Rico girls that came to us 2 years ago, and they were a hoot. They would at night they'd go in, they'd be studying English and reading the newspaper and boning up on their English, and they'd come into the clinic in the morning and say, "Okay, it's time to eat the squirrels." Feed the squirrels. It's a little bit different. So we learn from them as well as they learn from us. We encourage them to bring their country flag with them. We fly it on the flagpole out front, and we saddle them with the responsibility of cooking some of the meals so that they're cooking something that they enjoy, but we experience their culture as well. So it's a learning experience on both sides.
So you have a kitchen there to feed your staff, and somebody's doing that because you're running 3 shifts a day.
Yeah. We have a house that is right across the driveway from the clinic, and we can house 5 interns in the house. It's fully equipped, full kitchen, dining room, living room with TV, widescreen TV, bunk beds, and they enjoy one another's camaraderie. We're very, very careful as to who we choose as interns. We get about 90 applications a year for volunteers, and we only accept maybe 20, 25 new ones every year. So we interview them. For the ones that are not available to interview in person, we do it over Zoom. Last year it was totally on Zoom, and we're very careful. What's really important to us is not only are they intent on developing their skills, but they're the type of person that's going to get along well with the others that they're working with. So, you have different personalities. You have analyticals and drivers and amiables and expressives. And you put a driver and an analytical or a driver and an amiable in the same room, there'll be bloodshed in the first half hour. So.
Particularly when you get into the animal realm, because so many of the people drawn to that, I hesitate to say this because it's perhaps overly critique, but I certainly see this in the dog world. They describe themselves as lovers of dogs, but so often I find they're haters of people, and dogs are an easy connect. And that, I mean, as much as this is about animals or dogs when you're dog training, it's a people business if you really want to do well. Which I just wanted to circle back. I think you said the teacher's name was Glenn Campbell, Brian, was it?
No, Dwayne Campbell.
Dwayne Campbell. Well, Glenn stuck in my head because there I thought, oh, really? He's branched out since he passed on. So, and then into your on your list of top 3 about education and certification. In the educational world, kindergarten to grade 12, anything they teach has a lesson plan, and there's only so much a teacher's left over at the end of the day. Have you ever thought about that, about at different sort of grade levels, like develop an actual lesson plan with the support videos and the educational material that's age appropriate, and just sprinkle that? Like, I would think that there'd be a few Board of Educations out there that might take advantage of that. I always figure if you can offer the solution, if it's not a make work project for them, and you figured, well, it's worked for us, but it would do more. Like it's an investment that we think would branch out and do a lot more good. Is that something you've ever thought of?
Yeah, you're right on the money with that. When we first developed our education programs, we had a good hard look at the Ministry of Education's curriculum for students, and we read the book and came up with 6 different education programs, right, for primary kids all the way up to the university level.
Yep.
And what we found was that it helped the students to understand in real time what they were being taught in the classroom. It's one thing to talk about principles of flight, but we have a program called the Miracle of Flight. And when you see a red-tailed hawk that is flying just above your head from the back of the room or auditorium to the stage, you get to a real interest in it. I remember one time we were talking to a group of youngsters. I think they were in grade 3 or 4, and we had talked about our falcon, Shakar. He's a lager falcon, but his species can dive at over 250 kilometers an hour. And I looked down at one of the little girls that was sitting in the front row, and I said, that's probably faster than your mom can drive. And she looked up at me and said, no, it's not. So sometimes they have a skewed knowledge of of math or speed or what have you. But when you take it to them in a very real sense, I think the learning experience. Well, you know yourself. I mean, some of the things that you learned well in school were because of teachers that made it fun to learn. And I think that's the whole
Absolutely.
process. And
Yep.
when it can be fun, you absorb more, you keep more of it, and it becomes practical knowledge that you can develop from there.
My argument
So,
might be there, Brian, though, that those teachers, you're correct, but those teachers are so few and far
mm,
between that
yeah.
I was, what I was suggesting was something where you give the lesson to them, like you structure
Mm,
it and you make it entertaining because you've done a lot of those presentations and stuff, so you
mm,
know what resonates, and they'd be starting from scratch. I just like Paul and I have talked about it in another episode about like introducing things like critical thinking and what a logical fallacy is and cognitive bias at the kindergarten level in an age appropriate manner and sprinkle it throughout their education rather than wait to post secondary and hard science or philosophy. That's too late then. Like now is the time to get it, but there doesn't seem to be the I, I couldn't put my finger on the reason that we don't see these intelligent changes in education, and I don't expect to see them. So I have wondered about, particularly now with COVID and how Zoom's affected an in-home learning, if there wouldn't be a greater openness in the educational system for people offering like lesson like here you don't have to invent it. Here it is. We are experts. Here we'll give your teacher all the resources they'll need. Like it kind of, you could even offer like the grade 8 one. At the end, they get a certificate saying they're junior rehabilitators, and just start planting those seeds.
yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. I think the teachers are compelled to work within the framework of what the government has provided for them. But we do just that. We offer them these programs that we have. They have an opportunity to look at it and how it might apply to the students and enhance what they are being taught. So we don't take an upper hand with the teachers, but what we do is we provide them with a means of making it the lessons very real. We rarely will do a single classrooms. We often will do an auditorium or, a gymnasium presentation, and the the level of um, the level of the students can vary from grade 4 to grade 8 type of thing. So you have to be able to cater to those different levels of education as well as their comprehension. The little kids, I mean, gosh, if you don't catch their interest right up front and have more energy than what they've got, you're going to get beat up intellectually because they're just not going to pay any attention to you. So
Right.
we have to adjust things according to who our audience is. You got to know your audience. That's the thing.
Brian, I have a question about sort of the psychology of the animals, and I'm curious that when they are in your rehabilitation center and they're being treated, what is their level of fear, and do they ever overcome that and reach a point where they realize they're being taken care of and relax?
Yeah. Well, It varies with the individual, but generally speaking, I can say that a lot of the animals that come to us are, they don't even know where they are. They have head injuries. They're not cognitive of who's taking care of them or how type of thing. There are others, however, that are very aware of their surroundings, and stress becomes a significant factor in their recovery. We know that stress has a terrible effect on the human system, and it's likewise with birds and animals. That those steroids that are pumped into their system as a result of stress can have far-reaching damaging effects and impede their recovery. Our goal is to get them out back into their natural environment as quickly as we possibly can, and so that we not only help them to be better faster, but make room for other patients that are waiting to come in as well. We had a red-tailed hawk here just a short while ago that came in, and he was blind in one eye as a result of a concussion and incident with a car. And he, in the wild, we know that one-eyed red-tailed hawks can indeed survive, but it's usually because of a cataract. And as a cataract grows, they themselves change their hunting behavior to accommodate only one eye. But when it happens all of a sudden, it's a different story, and oftentimes they'll starve to death before they have a chance to accommodate that blind eye. So it becomes a situation for us that we have to be able to teach them how to hunt with one eye.
Right.
And if they're stressed out, that teaching process is not going to work very well. You have to
No.
develop a bridge of trust with that animal, which really goes against the grain, because we don't want animals becoming habituated or imprinted in
Right.
some cases to humans. So we have to be very careful how we go about this. And we put them into mouse school, and we get them flying on a creance line, chasing a lure. We change the direction of the lure with stakes in the ground, and particularly with the lure going towards their blind eye, they have to learn to turn their head towards the lure in order to maintain visual contact. Otherwise, in the wild, they lose it even for a second, and the chances are that mouse or rabbit is gone. And so they learn to deal with their disadvantage, and they end up doing it really well. But again, the stress factor is really important in monitoring that, making sure that they're comfortable in their surroundings. And then once you have built that bridge of trust with them, then you have to break it.
Right.
And that's the hard part in some cases. You get a bald eagle that you came in as a youngster, and he has no hunting skills whatsoever, and you got to teach him that. So you have to develop a bridge of trust, similar to what a falconer would do. But then now it's time. He's better. He's hunting well. He needs to go, but he still has an affinity to people.
Right.
And we have to break that by acting unpredictably. We're not rough with them, but we act unpredictably, and they come to mistrust you. And when that bridge of trust has been broken, then we know they're going to be okay, and we can let them go.
That's it.
That must be one of the struggles for the people who are drawn to rehabilitation work. They're probably not often aware of that. Certainly back in the older days where I knew a little bit more about this, that was one of the big problems. It was sort of that Conrad Lorenz, an ethologist, called it baby schema. That sort of, I want to nurture, love, and that sort of thing is a temptation. So there was far too much interaction, and as you say, habituation. And I think that in its essence, a wonderful characteristic in a potential rehabilitator. So it must be difficult to change their thinking when they actually get involved and realize they have to play the bad guy, and in many instances in rehabilitation, they have to do. There has to be distancing, and it's not the movie The Lady and the Tramp. It's a workflow that requires a very strict protocol. Did you find that sort of a difficult for some of your volunteers?
Well, we train our volunteers really well in that area. They go through an orientation and 2.5 hour training meeting. We can't teach them everything, of course, in that small time frame, But one of the things we stress is not trying to, you got to squash those maternal instincts. 75% of our volunteers are women, and they have a lot more going for them in the sense of compassion and empathy.
Yep.
They can sense things that us guys can't. Oftentimes we'll have a female volunteer come and say, "I don't know what's wrong, but something doesn't seem right." 90% of the time, they'll be right. Whereas us guys, he's got four legs and a head, he's fine.
Yeah.
He's okay.
Yeah.
But it's yeah. So we recognize that that can be a problem, and that they need to bury that maternal instinct for the best interest of the animal, because otherwise you limit their ability to survive in the wild. Fawns, for instance, habituate on people. Oh my gosh, you got to be really careful with them.
Sure.
Merlins, another falcon that habituates on people really, really easily. Any young bird. It's an ongoing thing. We pride ourselves in being able to do this reasonably well. Habitat are going to be able to survive in the wild without looking for people when they get hungry.
Right. One of the other interesting things that I hadn't really thought about when I was reading your website was you recommend that when people find an injured animal, that they do not feed it.
Mm.
And
Yeah, and there's good reasons for that too. Um, we know through our experience and our data records over the last 19 years that an animal that has been fed before it's admitted at Salthaven only has a 19% chance of survival.
is that right, eh?
Now, that's against a 65% chance of survival in the normal course of an animal's admission and rehabilitation. Some of the reasons for that is that the food is usually inappropriate. Baby animals, for instance, you're introducing a new formula, and oftentimes it'll be given full strength. Too much, uh, too cold, too hot, creating metabolic process problems. The animal may not be able to metabolize it at all because he's in shock. And the way the animal's being kept has, that he's hearing and seeing things he's not used to hearing and seeing. It could have the effect of driving him even deeper into shock.
Mhm.
And when they're in shock, they're not thermoregulating their body temperature, and so that produces problems in the metabolic process as well. And so we suggest to people when they find an animal, no food, no water, just quiet, dark, and warm. That's the magic. Get it into the hands of a wildlife rehabilitator as quickly as possible. And it's not always possible to do that because at certain times of the year, wildlife rehabilitators get full, and
Small.
it's very difficult to get an animal into some place like Salthaven.
Mhm.
So especially with COVID, this year has been demoralizing to a degree in the sense that there are animals I know we could have fixed out there, but there's no room at the inn. And that was one of the effects that COVID had on Salthaven. But we did the best that we could, and we can take solace there that we didn't slack. We used all of our resources to help as much as we possibly could.
In the cat and dog world, the rescue world, my hypothesis is the reason that the turnover is so high in the volunteer or even in the administrative levels is, uh, well, is they're not making a difference, and they get into it because they want to make a difference, but the numbers are always unrelenting, and if not, getting worse. And so I think that people get burned out and discouraged in dealing with the same sort of things and repeating the same sort of things to people all the time. Do you find that as an issue in wildlife rehabilitation with your volunteers? Do they find it more uplifting, or do they get discouraged as well?
Yeah, I think there's a certain that's a really good point. There's a certain element of discouragement, especially, there are some days it seems like every animal you touch dies or needs to be euthanized, and so that's you see a lot of that in wildlife rehabilitation. We address that situation in the training of new volunteers. We're careful to be sensitive to the emotions of the volunteers, especially if an animal has to be euthanized, and it's one that they've been helping to hopefully rehabilitate.
Sure.
And so, yeah, there is that aspect of it that there's always a tendency to want to make an animal a pet, and you give it a name,
Yeah.
and so you become emotionally involved with that animal. And when it doesn't make it, it makes it very difficult emotionally. Um, but for us old hands have been around for a long time, it doesn't have the same effect. But we still need to be sensitive to the volunteers that want to make a
Sure.
difference and feel like
Uh,
it's not happening. And my gosh, we saw 5 animals that died and or needed to be euthanized today. And is
Yeah.
it really, it's a drain.
That's
But
a big theme in the animal world in general. The fantasy versus the reality.
yeah,
The thing that attracts you to it, and then like even veterinarians. I mean, a lot of veterinarians get very discouraged because the
sure,
reality of their work is not what they'd anticipated, and so for a lot of reasons. But yeah, it's a factor. I just was curious whether it had the same impact for the sort of mindset would be attracted to the wildlife rehabilitation.
yeah. I think the world in general, is has this compassion fatigue. I think that because of
Yeah.
things that are happening in the environment, and but we try to make sure that the people that we choose have a good balance between compassion, empathy, and needing to get the job done. It's difficult, but I think we've done a pretty good job. Some of our volunteers have been around for over 10 years, and I think that's really the mark of we chose the right people. They've been educated well, and
Absolutely,
they're
good
still
sign.
at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it is a process. It is difficult. We find that some of our younger volunteers, you have to be at least age 16 to volunteer at Salthaven with parents' consent, otherwise age 18, and to
right.
be in good health. And we find that some of our younger volunteers are the ones that are most enthusiastic, recover from those blows where an animal, that anthropomorphic tendency is able to be put in its proper perspective. And when we see somebody struggling a little bit, we'll take them aside. We call it a walk and talk with Brian, and they, we explain that why that process didn't turn out the way we wanted it to, and help to strengthen them a little bit and let them know that they are doing a job that's really important, and that we appreciate most of all that they are making that attempt to make a difference. And
You
I
know,
think that's really important in the world. Making a difference is such a, you know, there are a lot of people that just don't care, but those
no,
people that
that's right.
do are really special.
On a bit of a tangent, the from a zoonotic perspective, are there protocols that you have your volunteers have to embrace? Like, what sort of things? I remember years ago, I got a rabies shot proactively in order to protect. Do they have to get that sort of thing in order to work to volunteer there?
No, they're not compelled to have uh, um, rabies preemptive shots. If they're going to be working with rabies vector species, they do. We have a bat squad, for instance. There's 10
Right.
volunteers that come in the evenings. They clean cages, they feed, they make sure the bats are well taken care of, and they're with us from November all the way through till beginning of May.
Oh,
And but those individuals need pre-exposure rabies shots in order to work with them.
How
Otherwise,
frequently do they have to have their? Do they do a titer periodically with them, or
every
yeah?
year, every year.
And from like if you've got 10, how do the titers look after? I guess this is sort of a side. I've always wondered about that because I knew that with the some individuals they do a titer 5 years later and they're still protected, and other ones need a booster sort of thing. How
yeah.
have you found that worked? I guess it's more personal curiosity here.
Yeah, it's different for every individual. We had one
Yeah.
individual, zero point 0.5 is is the level that everybody looks for as being, protected. But we had one individual that had 8 as his level. I mean, he could probably given you rabies if he bit you. But it is different. I'm one of those guys where the vaccine doesn't register well with me. I have to have a booster shot every year,
Is
and
that right?
so we
Oh,
work with individuals to make sure that that titer is being renewed every year before they can work with those species. So raccoons, foxes, skunks, bats, those types of animals are, yeah.
how
Okay.
often are bites happening? Is it a common occurrence? Is it
No, we're very fortunate in that way. We have certain protocols when you're handling animals like squirrels or whatever that are biting as to
squirrels are
how you can
biters, are
do
they?
that.
Are
Oh
squirrels
gosh, yeah,
biters? Oh,
yeah. If they're frightened, yep.
okay.
We make sure that they, first of all, the handling techniques are such that makes it very difficult to get bit. But even a scratch, and we don't get very many of those, but even a scratch needs to be reported to me. I personally take an interest in that. If I think it's important, if it's deep enough, we suggest they go to see their family doctor, and we follow up with that. 24 hours later, we're asking them, "Did you get in touch with your doctor?" "Yes, we did." "Do you have an appointment?" "Yes, we do." "Thank you very much." And sometimes the doctor will prescribe an antibiotic. And other times he may say, "No, you don't need to worry about it." But it's important from our perspective that they are hand in hand with their professional group, being their doctor, their family doctor.
So
And if they don't have a family doctor, then a clinic.
I imagine that you have the long, thick gloves that they
Mm.
wear for many types of animals. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there are some animals like foxes that we use loopholes and whatnot to
Sure.
subdue them, especially when they're really cranky. And we get a lot of foxes in that have sarcoptic mange, and some of them are just almost comatose when we see them. They're emaciated. It's a horrible parasite, and but once they start feeling better, and we have to clean their enclosure, so we have to make sure first of all that they're subdued. They're not interested in interacting with you, but we take those precautions because you never know. We treat rabies vector species like a loaded gun, and take those extra precautions. We're dealing with people that are coming out to help, and we don't want them to have a bad experience because they were bitten by an animal that was found later to have rabies.
Right.
That would be devastating, not only to that individual, but to the whole volunteer group.
Yeah, something you said there is just piqued my curiosity, and I'm curious when you're cleaning the animal's cage, are there different types of litter for different types of animals?
Yeah, well, there is. I mean, with birds, there's not too much you can do about it. They're going to let go wherever they want to. But in our raptor mews, they get cleaned out every day. So the bird is taken out, and then a crew goes in, usually 1 or 2 people, and they spend 15 minutes in there and wipe down the walls. They clean the pea gravel. It's hosed out if necessary, and then the bird is reintroduced back into the mews. For animals like foxes, they have to be taken out, and they're usually put into a new enclosure that has been previously cleaned, so that they only have to be handled once. And it varies.
Yeah,
Some of them maybe every 2 days you have to do it, but on others you got to do it every day.
it's not something that most people think about, so I thought it was interesting to find out.
I
This,
often wondered how Noah did it in the ark. That would have been,
well, even
gosh.
food, how do you handle the different food requirements? I mean, do you keep on stock certain types of food for certain types of animals?
Yeah, that's a huge program at Salthaven.
I bet.
You have even the birds of prey have different preferences.
Right,
You'll get
right.
red-tailed hawks that love mice and rabbits and chicks and things like that, whereas merlins want small birds. That's what they eat. And so yeah, we have a food preparation room that is very busy
I bet.
at Salthaven, and frozen food is taken out for them the night before, and it's thawed, ready to go the following morning. So we have one, two, three, 4 fridges, and one large freezer and 2 smaller freezers. that accommodate the needs of the animals that we have.
So are there actually suppliers of frozen mice?
Yeah,
I didn't know
yeah.
this.
There's I mean, there's a lot of food that we have to buy. Like we go through 20,000 mealworms in a week.
Wow.
There's, we need earthworms as well, and we'll go through 10 dozen earthworms in 3 or 4 days, depending on the type of birds, especially in the early spring when you have high protein need birds like robins.
The logistics
Um,
of that alone must take up somebody full time.
well, we have a crew, an office crew that keeps on top of that. Their primary purpose is answering telephones. They're trained by me, so the training is consistent. We
Hmm.
feel that the first handshake that people have oftentimes with Salthaven is over the phone.
Right.
And but they are responsible also for taking care of food needs and food stocks. So that is addressed every day, and we place orders well in advance so we don't run out of anything. Every now and then, even in spite of that, we do, and it's panic. So we try to avoid that situation.
Yeah, very
That's
interesting.
it.
If we were going to reach out to our listeners here, how can people help you
Right.
in the most practical way possible?
Well, on the food side, it's difficult because you never know what you're going to need from day to day. It is a day to day planning thing. But there are the things that we do need on a regular basis. For instance, nitrile gloves, examination gloves. We go through 4,000 pairs of examination gloves each and every year, and that's a lot of money. And people, if they pick up a couple of boxes every now and then and send it out to Salthaven on our wish list, on our website, they can do this right through Amazon. They don't even have. They can do it
I
in
was
their
just going to
underwear.
suggest that we could put the link here at the end so people could just point and click.
Mhm.
So gloves, what else?
Yeah, nitrile gloves, mediums and smalls. Those are the things. As I say, 75% of our volunteers are women, so they have smaller hands. What are the other big ticket items here? Bird seed. We go through a lot of that just about all year round. Right now, we're pretty well equipped on that side. The towels that we had that we were using in the enclosures with the foxes that we had this season. We changed their enclosures twice a day in most cases. So we were throwing towels out. We don't like to put those in the wash, especially with sarcoptic mange. I mean, the mange mites are usually dead within 2 or 3 days after the initial vaccination, but we just don't want to take the chance. And so they get thrown out. The foxes usually chew the heck out of them anyway. So we ran right out of towels. So we put a plea out on our social media. We had 87,000 hits on the on that request for large towels, and we thought, oh my gosh, like the phones are going to light up here, and they did. And we tried to shut it off, at least the Facebook thing, but that was that very next day, Facebook went down worldwide, and so we couldn't. And so the phones were just backed right up with people wanting to donate towels, and which was very gratifying to know that people were willing to support us to the level that they did. But we finally ended up phoning the Humane Society and saying, look, we're being inundated with towels here. Can you folks use any? And they said, absolutely. So we started referring people to the London Humane Society and Animal Care Center, London Animal Care Center. But yeah, it's a hit and miss. Sometimes we hate putting things on social media because you get such a huge response.
Yeah.
What about
People don't want to help.
one-time or ongoing or estate planning type donations?
Yeah, and we have been very fortunate with that. For years now, we've been advocating that keep Salthaven in mind in your estate planning. It's a great way to reduce taxes, and we have had some people that have left partial estates to Salthaven, which has helped us immensely in putting together our programs. We're in the process. We've had terrible internet reception out here because we're in the country, and so it's been all satellite. So it's really impacted our education programs, especially with COVID. We can't even downstream video because of that. But just recently, we received a partial estate, which allowed us to put up a tower here at Salthaven, and now we have line of sight. We have incredible reception. And so that has prompted us to build a studio, a broadcasting studio, in the basement of the house at Salthaven. And we'll be doing things like this, podcasts and education programs, green boards and whatnot, that we could be broadcasting from Hawaii as far as anybody knows.
Sure.
But
Excellent.
we want to make it as interesting as possible. As far as I know, there aren't too many wildlife rehabilitation centers in southwestern Ontario that do that. So grants and estates have played a big part in us being able to. We moved from Mount Bridges to Strathroy, and a good part of what we were able to buy this property with came from an estate. So it's it's wonderful that people are seeing fit to support us in that area.
Does your website reflect the new address? I'm pretty sure I thought it said Mount Bridges when I looked.
It still does, as a matter of fact. We work
Okay.
by appointment only, and it's we run a pretty tight ship as far as the appointments that come in, because an animal comes in, it has to be triaged, medical charts have to be made, etc. So you need time to do that as well. Well, at the old place, we were getting 3 and 4 cars coming at a time, and
Yeah.
people were having to wait in a hot car. Because we don't want them out running around with the animals on the grounds, and became a bit of a problem. So we kept our post office box in Mount Bridges when we
Ah,
moved to Strathroy. And when people call, we give them the address, and there's a protocol, there's a landing sequence here at Salthaven, and it works out very well. But that's the reason for that.
you mentioned a few moments ago about different rehab centers in, let's say, southwestern Ontario. Do they play well together? Do you find that you get the synergy from them as well, or is it are the lines of communication open for sharing help and like the towels and that sort of thing?
Mm. Yeah, most do. Um, we um, we have a pretty good relationship with many of the wildlife rehabilitators in southwestern Ontario. There's about 55 of them, actually, I think,
Is that right?
according to the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources. But most of them are backyard rehabilitators,
Hmm.
so they don't have the capacity that we do. There's a lot of them are very skilled and deserve to be licensed. There are some that you wonder, but for the
Are they
most part,
species specific, Brian? Like when
some of
the
them
ones who
are.
work out of, are they? Oh, okay.
Yeah, some of them are. Some of them will only do squirrels or only
Yeah.
do bunnies or whatever, but that's useful.
Yeah.
And
Are you the
but yeah,
biggest? Are you the biggest one in southwestern Ontario?
no, Toronto Wildlife Center is a big organization. There's another one in Amherstburg, Wings, run by Nancy Phillips. She has a really good operation there. Erie Wildlife in Windsor, they run a pretty good organization there as well. I'm probably missing a couple here. Hobesty,
Okay, I was surprised to hear that there were, what did you say, 55 of them?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But as I say, a lot of them
They're
are
smaller. They're smaller, yeah.
they're smaller, and they have full time jobs. They come home at night, and they do the rehab thing, but um, they're dedicated to the cause nonetheless.
Right, of course.
So we have, yeah. In answer to the question, we have a pretty good um, uh, communication with them and a relationship that we share things. Um, 2 years ago, we had somebody who called us that said they had an in with B&D, which is a big medical supply company, and they had syringes, 1, 3, 5s, 10s, 25 cc syringes, and we thought, well, we could use those. So we said, yeah, bring them over. Well, they brought a truck with 15 pallets of syringes. I mean, we wouldn't have used that in 20 years. And so we got on the phone and we called Wildlife Rehabilitator and said, look, here's the situation. If you like them, come on out and get them. We just couldn't deliver them all. And we did. We had probably about 15 wildlife rehabilitation centers that came out and picked up all the syringes that they needed. So yeah, and things like towels. Yep, we send those out to rehab centers as well if we get too many, like we have in the last little bit here.
We probably should have opened with this, Brian, but how did you get started in this? What sparked the interest in you? Because I know you had a prior career a lot of people don't know about, and a successful career, and you transitioned over into this, and as you said, it's an unpaid uh, position, so it's a work of passion for you.
Yeah, it is a work of passion. Um, yeah, I had a background in the music industry, and we worked with a band called Lowdown from London, and Doug Vardy, Ted Floyd, and myself. We became quite close as a result of our working relationship, and we played all over Canada, as a matter of fact, and we opened shows for the Beach Boys, Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, Mamas and Papas, John Cougar Mellencamp, Roy Orbison, Ricky Nelson, to name a few. Did quite a bit of traveling with it. We had 4 songs in the top 10 in the Canadian charts.
You had a #1 song too, didn't you? Gimme Some?
We did. Yeah, Gimme Some was #1 for 10 weeks, as I recall.
Right.
And was knocked off that #1 position by Brian Adams, Cuts Like a Knife. And so there was a fair amount of success with that. It was something that, again, we were all passionate about. And there's a lot of parallels between the music industry and wildlife rehab in the sense that it's not a 9 to 5 job. You know, as a musician, you're a musician 24/7, and you never know when inspiration and ideas are going to come to you, and you need to take advantage of that. And so it is with wildlife rehabilitation as well. It's not 9 to 5; it is 24/7. And you know, there are often nights where you wake up in the middle of the night at 2 o'clock in the morning to go out and give more fluids to a fawn, an ailing fawn, or you know, whatever. And so you have to have a certain amount of passion with that. But there's 2 sides to it, you know, that kind of motivated me. There was that passion for wildlife and the behavior of these animals I found to be remarkable. But there's also the scientific side, and the science really compelled me to want to know more, because that combined with the behavior of animals and how animals learn and the physical capabilities that they have just fascinated me. You know, like the eye of a hawk, for instance. You know, we have about um, 250,000 cone cells per square millimeter in our eyes, and those cone cells allow us to see the colors that we do. You know, the blues and greens and reds and so on. Well, a hawk doesn't have 250,000 cone cells per square millimeter. He has well over 1 million. They see colors that we don't see. In fact, if we could see the world through their eyes, it would probably freak you out because you'd be seeing things you'd never seen before. And not only that, but they have 2 focal points. Now, one that allows them to see like we do, and another one that allows them to see great distances. And they can focus on both of them at once,
That's amazing.
which is rather remarkable. And so, you know, those physiological things with animals has always been a fascination to me and helped me immensely when we're working with animals, for instance, with eye injuries and that.
When you relax, Brian, do you relax to music, or is music still a big part of your life?
It was a very difficult decision for me to leave the music industry. I realized that it had to be one or the other. I couldn't do both. I mean, I was getting home at 3 o'clock in the morning from a gig, and then getting up at 6 o'clock to do, you know, whatever needed to be done, prepare for volunteers, etc. And physically, it was beleaguering. I just wasn't able to do it. And so I thought, you know, gosh, you know, am I still going to be playing music when I'm 70? Maybe. But could I do more good in the world by jumping on board with Salthaven and making it all it could be, living up to its full potential? So I chose the latter, and you know, I still miss it. I still miss the playing. I still miss the creativity. You know, as a drummer back then, anything I can think of, I could play, and all my limbs were coordinated and complying with my brain. But you know, I don't have that anymore.
If we were to tour your house, would we find a drum set in the basement?
We have 4 drum sets here, but they're like my kids. I can't get rid of them. You know, there's too many memories. But every now and then I get called to do something and with some musician friends, and I enjoy it immensely. But when I do those things, it's as much a frustrating experience. I have to learn to shift gears and realize I just can't do those things that I used to do. And
We just
you know,
interviewed Jim Chapman. Do you know Jim?
hmm, yeah, Jim's a good friend, actually. Yeah, in fact, I played with Jim. We worked in a band called Homespun,
Ah,
and
okay,
Jim was the bass player in that band, and we had some great times together.
great.
We have some great road stories. And then
Very interesting. It's been utterly fascinating. I tend to be very interested in sort of the logistics and management side of some of these things, and you've answered a lot of questions. And you're doing very good work, and I hope that people who listen to this podcast will have their eyes opened as well.
well, I appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts with you, and you've asked some really good questions, and they're right on the mark, because they're the questions that we deal with here almost every day, and we love the work that we do. Make no mistake about that. Otherwise, we just wouldn't do it. But sometimes there's just a whole lot more work than we than we would like. So there's a
Well,
lot of opportunity for people, the general public, to partner with us again and help the plight of Canadian wildlife. That's our goal.
do you want people applying to you for on-site volunteer positions?
Yeah, we our volunteer program is based on three pillars. Number one, keeping our volunteers safe because they're dealing with wild animals.
Right.
Number two, keeping the animals safe. That's one of our main purposes here. But the third pillar is helping volunteers to have a meaningful experience and an enjoyable experience while they're at Salthaven. And I think for the most part, all three of those things are addressed and have equilibrium of their own and makes the Salthaven program what it is.
Thank you very much. We certainly appreciate it, Brian.
And
Well,
if
they
you
say
think
in
of
the
anything, Brian, like afterwards that you want to be put in the notes at any point down the road, because it's always editable,
Yeah,
just reach out.
hopefully we get a chance maybe to talk at some point in the future.
love to do that. Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Bye,
Great
Brian.
chatting with you. Take care. Bye-bye.